Episode 1 of Pluribus begins with a countdown. We are 439 days and 19 hours away until a mysterious event will enslave all of humanity. With time ticking, an extraterrestrial signal from outer space flashes up on the servers at NASA. As more people get involved, they all draw the same unspoken conclusion. This is coming from 600 light years away, and one of the men seems to understand what this code is. Fast forward to 71 days and 13 hours left, and we catch up with Carol Sturcker. She's the latest Rebecca Yarros, Colleen Hoover sensation, and her romantasy book has seen a whole rabble of women arrive to hang on her every word as she reads a speculative historical romance fiction. While Carol's fans adore her work, Carol herself sees it as mindless crap. She's with her partner Helen, and these two are going to be important figureheads going forward. For now though, we jump to 29 days and 23 hours. A couple of lab scientists are testing mice, but when one of them plays dead, the mice that is, Jen opens the cage to check for a heartbeat. Unfortunately, it bites her and Jen immediately begins seizing. Her partner throws her into decontamination, but it's no good. It seems like Jen has been infected with an unknown virus. This virus appears to be spread through kissing, and it doesn't take long for the entire lab to be contaminated. Eerily, the men and women here silently work in sync, taking mouth swabs in petri dishes. Jen even licks every donut out in the foyer to make sure this virus spreads further. The next scene, we are 3 hours out from the big main event. Carol and Helen head to the bar, where Carol ruminates over whether to ditch her trashy fiction and work on her serious book instead. Heading outside for a smoke, Carol notices all the plane trails up in the air, running parallel and in sync. What she's unaware of though is that the airbase nearby is on lockdown. She snaps out of her chat by a guy getting into his pickup and immediately crashing in the parking lot. Unfortunately, Helen also winds up infected, and it doesn't take long for Carol to realise this is a widespread phenomenon. Inside the bar, everyone is seizing, and Carol appears to be the only one here unaffected. She takes the pickup, loads Helen in the back, and watches in horror as she overlooks the city on fire. Now everybody's facing the same issue, and the only person through all of this that's not affected happens to be Carol. When Helen passes away, everybody else in the general area suddenly snaps out of their trance and confront Carol. One of the doctors tries to kiss her, which doesn't seem to work in spreading the virus, and when they all say in unison, "We just want to help Carol," she grabs the pickup and takes off. Now as she drives, people work together to put out the fires, but they also watch Carol drive by too. Some even walk in the same direction as her stolen pickup. Now Carol manages to keep it together long enough to drive back home, where two of her neighbour's children speak together and tell her where her spare key is. Now inside her house, Carol watches as the entranced masses load up the deceased into a truck. Turning on the TV, the only message on the news happens to be one directed at Carol, telling her to give a call whenever she's ready. Pouring herself a glass of touch courage, Carol manages to speak to the senior most official in the government, who tells her that she's safe and should stay at home for the next few days. Apparently these guys are beneficiaries of extraterrestrial technology. Now 14 months ago, this radio signal was detected as we know, but it turns out the signal was actually a recipe which was recreated in a lab. This psychic glue bound everyone together as one hive mind. Apparently there are 11 individuals in total that have been unaffected by this around the globe. Unfortunately, the collective want Helen to join them, and that is where episode 1 of Pluribus comes to an eerie end. Episode 2 of Pluribus begins with us over in the Middle East, with a long montage of the cleanup efforts going on there. A woman appears to be part of the collective joined, and after helping a body out of a car, she hops on a moped, heads to the airport and flies a plane. When she touches down in Albuquerque, she strips down and heads into the shower, where other collective bow and tend to her needs. At this point, we find out we're 11 hours and 26 minutes past the world becoming a collective whole. Carol awakens from a drunken stupor and slowly comes to terms with this new reality. She mourns Helen, of course, wrapping her in an old blanket and eventually digging the ground up to bury her. It's hard, laborious work, thanks to hard rock littering the ground. Now Carol is being watched from an Air Force drone 40,000 feet up though, and on the verge of heat exhaustion, given she's been digging for 2 hours straight, she's greeted by a neighbour with a bottle of water. Tellingly, Carol empties a bottle on the lawn to prove a point, but realises that the woman they've sent over to see her, whom we later learn is called Zoja, happens to be the spitting image of her character from her book, Raban, the gender swap version anyway. Apparently having a female protagonist was the original idea for her book, but thanks to Helen being part of this collective before passing away, all of her unique memories are now part of the joined. When Carol kicks off and shouts at Zoja in the street, she suddenly collapses on the ground. This appears to affect everybody else in the collective too, who are momentarily docile. It would appear that Carol's negative behaviour affects the collective as it's hard for them to take. However, the side effect of this is that their temporary freezing has caused millions across the globe to die. This is obviously difficult for Carol to take, who's on the verge of collapsing after vomiting. When she finally regains her strength, courtesy of a mini digger being dropped from a helicopter to help dig up the volcanic rock in the garden, Zoja also confirms here that there's actually one more person who's awake. The collective have become aware of a man in Paraguay who has awoken. Now Carol wants to meet the other people who are just like her, and that means boarding an empty plane bound for Bilbao in Spain, where this meet is scheduled to take place. Funnily enough, Carol decides to sit way back in economy, which is quite amusing because it really does show that she is the most miserable person on earth, right? Now at this point we are 2 days and 2 hours since the collective had taken over, and Carol meets the 5 other individuals who can speak English at the airport. It's a rather awkward affair, but these guys are Shumei, Kusumeo, Laxmi and Okombeya, and apologies if I've butchered those names. Each have family members with them who are part of the collective. The 5th person is a man called Kumba, and he arrives in a president's plane. He's certainly making the most of this luxury suite, and he even has a bunch of women here too. Now Carol is the only one who isn't exactly enthused by what's happening outside, and organises a meeting for just those not part of the collective. She wants to try and put the world right and save it. However, it turns out Laxmi's grandfather died during Carol's little anger outburst earlier in the episode. So understandably, she's not exactly in a particularly forgiving mood. She thinks Carol should educate herself over what the collective is actually like. And the others also argue their points too, with charismatic Kumba pointing out that racism is gone now, all the animals have been let loose from the zoos, and there's absolutely zero crime across the planet. Now interestingly, the collective do not kill, nor will they even think about killing live creatures either. The collective are very much vegetarian, and eventually Carol has heard enough and screams at the collective after a failed attempt to get through to Laxmi. However, it causes all of them to go in trance once more and begin seizing. Now 2 days and 16 hours past the event and Carol awakens, ruminating over her outburst. Now Zoja and the other collective don't have anything to stop her anger, and after they witness their own family members seizing thanks to Carol, everybody has left, except for one person. Any guesses who? Yep, it's Kumba. Now the main reason Kumba is still sticking around is because he wants Carol's blessing to sleep with Zoja. Now Carol wants Zoja to think for herself, which of course is easier said than done when you're part of one collective hive mind. However, there's a flicker, a brief moment, where Zoja seems to want to choose for herself. Now Carol eventually leaves and goes her separate way from the others, reboarding the original plane and flying economy once more. She clearly doesn't see things the same way they do, but Zoja goes with Kumba on the president's plane. The thing is though, just before she steps on board, there's a moment where the pair lock eyes, and it's enough to convince Carol to change her plan. Just before they take off, Carol has second thoughts and joins the others, which is where episode 2 comes to an end. Episode 3, or Pluribus, begins with us 2,617 days before the virus has spread across the world. We're in the past where Carol and Helen decide to stay in an ice palace up in Norway. While Helen thinks it's beautiful and is quite upbeat about the whole experience, Carol is predictably not. However, she can appreciate some of the beauty, at least as she and Helen sit together and watch the northern lights through the window. Now back in the present, we are 3 days and 3 hours past the collective taking over humanity. Carol is still flying in economy, because of course she is, but Zoja is here too. And Captain John McConnell is flying, which I guess is an improvement over the girl from TGI Friday's last episode. Carol is exasperated over the lack of experts in the scientific field outside of the collective. She is of course desperate to find a cure to whatever this thing is. After getting the lowdown on the different survivors, she also finds out a little more about the guy from Paraguay. This is Manusis, and he manages a self-storage facility. He hasn't really communicated with the collective, and given he only speaks Spanish and is keeping himself off the radar, Carol decides she wants to speak to him. It doesn't go well, and after he rudely shouts at her down the phone, Carol rings back and does the same. With this meeting a bust, Carol gets dropped off back home again. She leaves Zoja behind, who hands over all the mail in transit. There's a package here which happens to be a massage gun. Now Helen ordered this for Carol given how stressed she's been on the tour. When she rings Zoja and questions her about the present, Carol orders her to forget about Helen and erase all memories. We're now 4 days and 12 hours post the collective takeover, and in the morning food is delivered to Carol's door. She chucks it away though, stubbornly sticking to what she knows and demanding that the collective leave her alone. When she shows up at the supermarket, she finds the place completely empty. It turns out the collective are consolidating resources to centralise useful items for distribution. Now Carol's quick to ring the collective, and specifically Zoja, letting them know that she's an independent person, and ringing them all the time doesn't work for her. She'd rather just do her shopping like a normal person. Just like that, a whole bunch of trucks show up, along with dozens of people who work together to restock the supermarket. It doesn't take long for everything to be back to how it was before. Alone, Carol does her shopping, but hilariously ends up with a microwavable meal for dinner that night. Midway through watching TV, all the lights suddenly go out across the town. It's here we learn that the collective are also trying to conserve electricity and lighting too, isolating Carol's house from the grid. Zoja explains here that none of the collective are working at night, and given there's no crime either, there's no reason to keep them on. When Carol lashes out and tells Zoja to bring a hand grenade over, she does just that. It's a bit of dark humour that actually cracks Carol's facade a little, so she invites Zoja in for a drink. The Join don't know how long it will take to find a cure for her, but Carol scoffs at the vague time frame. Now all of humanity is in this room and nobody seems to know anything. This leads her to bring up the uniqueness of humanity and how this leads to unique lives and experiences. When Carol starts mentioning a few, Zoja softly butts in about Carol's experience with Helen in the Arctic. Now Carol is not happy, so she grabs the hand grenade and pulls the pin. Zoja grabs it and throws it out the window, jumping on Carol to protect her just as it explodes. Carol is shocked that this was a real grenade. Zoja is badly burned and rushed to the hospital, and she has a concussion and she's resting, but Carol is worried and more than a little bemused. Given the collective were happy to give her a live hand grenade, she goes over the moral implications of various other weapons, all the way up to nuclear bombs. Apparently the collective are happy-ish about giving her one, but it does raise a very interesting question. Is there anything the collective can say no to? Episode 4 of Pluribus starts with a look at Minusis. He's isolated, away from the Joined, and trying to find a radio signal to confirm that there are others out there like him. Low on food, the collective drop by with a plate of food, but like Carol, he's loath to take anything from them. In fact, he heads out in the middle of the night and uses a crowbar to tip the plate over. However, supplies are running low though, and no amount of scavenging through the other self-storage units can make up for that. When the phone rings, we see his perspective from Carol ringing from the plane. When she curses him out and hangs up, it works to spur him on to find out more about her. At this point, we're 7 days and 8 hours out from the collective takeover, and Carol leaves the hospital and takes the cop car parked outside. She drives back home, where she's horrified to discover a whole bunch of people have worked tirelessly to help patch this place up. It's as if the hole was never there. When she ushers them out of the area, Carol heads into her office and writes up what she knows about the Join so far, with different rules including how they're always honest and happy to please her. Wanting to try and learn more, she ushers in one of the Join from outside, a guy by the name of Larry. He recites extracts from her books and compares them to that of Shakespeare. Of course that's not the same sentiment shared by everyone, but one of her avid fans, Crazy Moira, was on the verge of committing suicide until she read Carol's book. This is why it touches her so deeply and why it skewed the Join's perspective. As for Helen though, she thought Carol's books were like cotton candy. She was grateful for the life they built together through selling this crowd pleaser, but she never really thought much of her writing. Her unpublished novel though is a different matter. Now Helen wasn't a fan of her work, but spoke to Val and agreed to get this published because it would make Carol happy. They also realised it wouldn't hurt her career either, so no harm, no foul. It's a tough pill to swallow for Carol, and she eventually ushers Larry out the room. And this confirms one thing though, that the Joined can't lie. Carol shows up to see Zoja next in the hospital and outright asks if the Joined can be reversed. It would appear that it can be, and this gives Carol ammunition to set to work and do just that. She breaks into the hospital lab and grabs a whole bunch of gear. The Joined give her some heroin when she asks for it, but in reality, she uses sodium thiopental to concoct a serum to loosen Zoja's lips. She tests it on herself in a really amusing scene before arriving to see Zoja in hospital. Injecting Zoja's IV with the sodium thiopental, Carol takes Zoja outside, and as soon as it kicks in, she demands to know how to put things back to how they were. However, it doesn't take long for others to cotton on to what she's done. Handcuffing herself to Zoja when the Joined surround her in a tight circle, Carol tries to get an answer, but the mob chant, "Please Carol," over and over again. It drowns out Zoja's voice. Unfortunately, Zoja goes into cardiac arrest not long after. Shocked by what's happened, Carol lets the others work to bring her back. Episode 5 of Pluribus begins at the hospital where Carol receives a call from Laxmi. She rips into Carol for making everybody cry and questions whether she's mentally unsound. Unfortunately, Carol's attempts to talk to her about what she's found out about the joint falls on deaf ears. For now, Zoja is resting and recovering from her cardiac arrest. Carol hangs about the hospital, sleeping, while the joined walk out the hospital in unison. Time passes and Carol awakens to find the place completely empty. Zoja is also gone too, and a recording on the phone confirms that the joined are here for her, but they need a little space for the time being. Now Carol heads up to the rooftop and notices that the joined are all leaving en masse in both directions out the city. She's left all on her own as we reach day 8 and 22 hours since the joined. Carol drives home and sets up her camcorder again. This time she leaves a message for the rest of the survivors, confirming that they can turn the joined back into individuals. She wants them to work together to find a solution, but whether anyone will actually listen to her or not is another matter. After recording her video, Carol drops the video outside in a package at the end of her driveway. She also leaves a voice note for the joined, telling them to pick up the parcel and make a copy of it to send to the other 12 survivors, subtitles and all. The joined don't send anyone personally, but a drone does hover over and grab it. Without anyone around, it does allow wild animals, namely dogs and wolves, to start rummaging through her trash. This is where she threw that plate of food last episode, if you'll remember. Now in the morning, Carol sorts out the trash, but this time the drone gets stuck on the lamppost, prompting Carol to head deeper into town to sort this out. However, in doing so, she realises that the trash is full of empty containers of milk. Now at the local dairy farm, she finds evidence that the joined has been using this factory to create some sort of concoction to help them function. They seem to have mixed water with a strange white powder. She doesn't know what it is, and with nobody to converse with, she deduces that the pH level is 7, but beyond that, there's not much else to go on. It also finally hits her that she's all alone. Well, not entirely alone, because as we've seen, there are wild animals around. This time, a whole pack of wolves show up at Carol's place, scavenging for food. They begin digging outside, right where Helen was buried. Now Carol does her best to stop them, and she eventually drives the cop car, with the sirens blasting, right into the garden to shoo them away. She even sleeps in the car too. Realising she can't leave the grave like this, Carol works to move a whole bunch of slabs to cover the grave. She works tirelessly through the day before focusing on this strange white powder. She traces the packet all the way back to a warehouse called AgriJet. Now Carol breaks into the huge freezer here, where she finds all the food being stockpiled. However, it's not just food being kept here. Carol lifts up a white tarp on the shelves and is shocked by what she sees. Episode 6 of Pluribus begins with Carol bolting out the warehouse. Shocked by what she's seen, Carol grabs her camcorder, determined to film it for evidence. Bracing herself, she heads back inside. There are shrink-wrapped items on either side of the shelves that happen to sport severed body parts. The whole place is filled with these parts, vacuum sealed and ready to be consumed. The joined are using a meat grinder to cook the bodies and then turning that into sustenance. There's a slick bit of editing here as Carol walks through the doors and ends up back home again. Whilst there, she packs up her things, and instead of having the drone send the video over, she's going to give it a personal touch this time. After all, she has no idea whether the videos are even getting to the survivors. Now Mr. Diabate is busy cosplaying James Bond's Casino Royale, and when the card game is up, the joined work silently to clean up the mess. Diabate is right in the heart of Las Vegas, living the high life. After getting cozy with a whole bunch of women in a hot tub, Carol shows up. She's guided to the Westgate Hotel, where Diabate is here waiting for her. He's actually seen Carol's old videos, and she's quite surprised that the joined are chill with showing him this. However, she's even more taken aback when Diabate has already figured out the joined are eating people. Sure, it's disturbing to him, but to help ease her mind, he has a video of his own to show her. Now with John Cena in the role of narration, he explains that the liquid the joined have been drinking is mostly stockpiled foodstuffs that are close to spoiling. They also include 12% of what they're calling HDP, which stands for human derived protein. Now 100,000 people pass away each day due to natural causes and accidents, and instead of leaving these remains to waste, or for animals to get at, which we've seen in previous episodes, they're using this as their source of HDP. It turns out Diabate and John Cena have been hanging out a lot recently, and a week back he actually outright asked about the milk. All the other survivors are also aware of this, and they share Diabate's nonchalance. If that wasn't enough, the joined are likely to die within a decade if they don't sort out their food, so the HDP argument is a good one, at least from their perspective it is. When Carol finds out about the schmoozing and closeness of the other survivors, minus Manusas, who's keeping quiet, she realises how very alone she is. Nobody else shares her concerns and it's difficult to take. Now when Carol leaves in the morning, Diabate drops another bombshell. The joined can't turn people yet unless they willingly consent to it. This virus is actually tailored to individual stem cells, but to obtain those, they must first collect them from their bodies. It's a very invasive procedure and they only just discovered this yesterday. Right now, Diabate is not consenting to this, and Carol is quite quick to make her thoughts felt on this matter too. There's no way she's about to consent to this either. At this point, we cut back to 9 days and 18 hours post-joined. Manusas checks out the radio signals and seems close to giving up. Every channel seems to bring back static, but one does not. He's marked 8.613.0 with a question mark, and it seems to be giving off a strange static signal. That night, Manusas receives the tape from Carol and it inspires him to leave. As he does, all the lights in town suddenly come back on. He heads back to his apartment, packs his things after eating some real food, and heads out. Unfortunately, his car stalls, so he's forced to go it on foot. His mother shows up, or at least one of the joined pretending to be her, and he ignores his mother. He wheels the car down the hill and jump starts it, sending him on his way. Episode 7 of Pluribus begins with Carol stopping to get some gas en route back home. She makes another request to get a red Gatorade from the joined, but while the drone is busy, she stocks up the car with a bunch of fireworks. We are 12 days and 20 hours post the joined, and Carol is back home again. She starts setting off those fireworks from before joining the cacophony of wolves howling. After a golfing session, Carol switches cars when the police cruiser fails to start. She heads out for Gemma's Hot Springs next, before enjoying some artwork at the local gallery, singing the whole time. That night, Carol decides to dine out someplace special, celebrating her and Helen's anniversary with a bunch of dishes from various years. Meanwhile, Manusas is en route to meet Carol. The joined want to try and help him, stopping by to offer a lift, but he ignores them completely and finds nearby cars to siphon fuel. He's completely self-reliant here and refuses to even indulge them. He's actually taken up English lessons too, trying to learn the same language so he can communicate properly with Carol. Eventually, Manusas is forced to go it by foot when the dense jungle looms ahead. It's dangerous and the joined are quick to intervene here. They want to help get him to Carol, but Manusas is having absolutely none of it. He tells them all they have is stolen and they can have nothing. With that, Manusas burns his car and sets off in the jungle alone, continuing his mantra of learning English the whole time. Unfortunately, he winds up hurting his back in the process, pricking himself on spiky thorns. Now Manusas cauterizes the wounds and continues to wander through the jungle until it becomes too much. He collapses on the ground and looks close to passing out. A helicopter stops by though and someone rappels down to pick him up. We're now 48 days and 16 hours post-joined. Carol continues to set off a bunch of fireworks and play golf back home. She's starting to lose faith completely and she's no longer singing either. Zoja rocks up in the morning and Carol immediately staggers forward and throws her arms around her sobbing. It turns out earlier on, she got some paint and wrote the words "come back" on the ground. The joined have listened and here they are. Episode 8 of Pluribus begins with Manusas waking up in hospital. He's not happy with the joined taking him from the jungle, so he holds the doctor up at knife point and heads out into the reception area. Manusas doesn't want freebies and asks for a receipt for the hospital fees. He also adds an ambulance to the bill too. He soon leaves the hospital, reinvigorated when he learns he's in Panama. He's still not 100%, but he takes an ambulance and continues on his way. Meanwhile, Carol makes a drink for Zoja, but things are super awkward between them. They eventually decide to play some card games, but Carol has been starved of any sort of social interactions, so she's not quite sure how to play this interaction. All the rest of the joined are back in town now too, and Zoja explains that they don't believe in ownership. Everything is shared and they all sleep together under one roof, which happens to be a stadium nearby. They obviously don't kill animals like we already knew, but they also don't usher an animal away either. When pets become attached to their owners, they stay by their side and the joined look after them. Carol even sleeps alongside the joined that night too. Now it becomes clear that her way of finding out information is to use a much softer touch, and it works an absolute treat. Not only does Carol learn that trains are used to transport food around the country, she also learns that whatever individuals feel, The hive mind also picks up on this. The joined are actually building a giant antenna and intend to use all the power in the world to send a signal to Kepler-22b. This explains those blackouts earlier in the season and why all the power at Carol's has been taken off the central grid. This planet is actually 640 light years from Earth, but the joined, like a virus, are determined to spread as fast as they possibly can. So when they're done with our planet, they'll focus on other planets next. It's a clever ruse, and Carol continues this charade the next day. After playing croquet with Zoja, Carol is invited out to an old diner, one that's been renovated and patched back up again. It actually burnt down in a fire, so they've remodeled the whole thing just for Carol. This is pretty overwhelming for our protagonist, given the place is where she used to cut her teeth writing. She gushes about how she used to work, and she's shocked that the joint have built it back up again. However, in the middle of everything, Carol leaves the diner silently and heads back home again. When Zoja heads back, Carol confronts her. She knows all of this is a ruse to distract her, and Zoja eventually admits that yes, they are aware that she hasn't given up on finding a way to stop them. Now Carol is vulnerable and admits that she'll do everything she can, even if it means being on her own again. And just like that, Zoja leans forward and kisses her. The pair do eventually end up sleeping together, and in the morning Carol is actually working, writing away on her typewriter. She's decided to switch her protagonist, Raban, over to being a woman now. The duo gush over the book's plot and even cook food together. However, Zoja realizes that Carol's world is about to be changed forever, given Manousos is almost at her house. Episode 9 of Pluribus begins its finale with a package transferred from a plane across the trails into a small village. The villagers there all begin chanting and singing as a metal tin is given to Kusumayu, the girl there. She breathes in the fumes and immediately starts convulsing, collapsing on the ground. The experiment is a success, and Kusumayu becomes one of the joined. We then cut across to 60 days and 16 hours post-joined. Zoja and Carol watch as Manousos is inbound to the latter's house. The joined believe he may have seen her first video and seen it as a rallying call. Now Carol intends to just hear him out and then send the guy on his way, but Zoja is obviously concerned. She and the other joined think he may be dangerous, and this immediately gets Carol's spidey sense tingling when he eventually does show up. She demands he keep his machete behind, and the pair disagree over where exactly to talk. This goes on for quite a while because Manousos obviously doesn't trust her and Carol doesn't trust him either. Eventually they compromise and talk out in the back garden. They disagree over the joined, with Carol obviously having softened over them but still very much intending to find a solution here. Manousos though sees them as outright evil. He wants them all completely destroyed and killed if need be. Manousos challenges Carol here, bringing up how she was left alone for 40 days. Interestingly, she doesn't tell them why they're back. Now Manousos doesn't trust anyone or anything, and even more so when he heads inside Carol's house. He's convinced the place is bugged and begins looking everywhere for the sensors. Eventually he does actually find something, which happens to be a sensor inside the alcohol cabinet. This was Helen's doing to keep an eye on Carol's alcoholism. Now when Manousos is dropped off at the adjacent house for the night, Manousos learns that Carol has been talking to the joined. He wants to figure out the gaps in his knowledge and rings through to them himself, demanding to talk to Zoja. When Carol finds out, she's pissed and rushes over to confront the pair of them. She's bitterly jealous, especially when Zoja points out that they love Manousos as much as they do with Carol. When she suddenly begins seizing, Carol realizes this is Manousos' doing. It turns out he's actually conducting an experiment on another of the joined. When they begin seizing, which in turn affects the whole hive mind, Manousos grabs his radio and turns it to that strange signal. It's clear Manousos is trying to save the joined and bring them back one at a time. It almost works, but Carol interferes and comes brandishing a shotgun, forcing him to stop in his tracks. However, because of Manousos and how dangerous he is for the joined, they all up and leave town once again. Manousos doesn't really care though, believing he stumbled upon the solution to save the joined. Carol though refuses to join him, no pun intended, and eventually drives off joining Zoja. Now Carol and Zoja then hang out together and have a good time up at a ski resort together. They talk about the unjoined Zoja, the one that Zoja's basically hijacked as the joined, and how she had someone a long time ago, but she's no longer in this body. Carol is genuinely happy here, regardless of the implications of what it means for the human race, perhaps more so than she was with Helen, especially when you take into consideration her trip to the igloos. However, Carol learns that the joined now have a way of getting her stem cells that doesn't require an invasive procedure to make her one of them. Zoja and the other joined have the eggs she froze with Helen. The joined are now working on these tirelessly to make her part of their cult. She has about a month until the Joined are able to do this and make her one of them. Carol though is not happy. In the meantime, Minusos continues to work and try to find a solution to all this, believing the radio signal holds the clue. However, a helicopter flies over outside, dropping a steel container down. Zojia is here too, given she's piloting the thing, and having dropped Carol off, she finally decides to join Minusos and save the world. As the episode closes out, we discover that the metal container holds an atom bomb inside, which is where season 1 of Pluribus comes to an end. Thanks for watching, and do let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Smash a like or subscribe to the channel, your support is very much appreciated. I'm Greg Wheeler, and from all of us over here at The Review Geek, we'll see you on the next video.